Welcome to the Diversity and Inclusion Summit as a part of the Spark Animation Festival, brought to you for the second year on behalf of WIA, which is Women in Animation. Women in Animation is the only organization dedicated to advancing women in the field of animation. And as the popularity of animation has grown and it's reaching audiences of diverse age and gender, ethnicity, and culture, as that growth continues, we also need to ensure that animation content represents the world as it should be and help move culture forward. So our Diversity and Inclusion Summit today is all about connection and community, one of my favorite topics. And our panel today is about widening our lens. It's all about bringing focus and into a discussion about personal experiences from diverse talent and active allies in the entertainment industry. Just a quick introduction of myself. My name is Alka Dumont. My pronouns are she and her. I've been a senior implementation manager at Electronic Arts for the past 4 years, and I'm based in the Bay Area, but I'm originally from Canada. Originally from Ontario, and I work with marketing and creative teams to make their day-to-day operations more efficient. And I'm moderating today's panel because I'm heavily involved in DEI work at EA. So DEI, if you don't know, stands for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. And I've held positions on the board of our women's ERG, and ERG stands for Employee Resource Group. And I've held a global position on our global board for Aspire, which is our Asian and Pacific Islander ERG. And I believe, to quote one of my favorite authors, Minda Harts, I believe we all have a voice and we just have to decide how we want to use it. So I am a South Asian woman in gaming, even though I have areas where I am considered a minority or considered disadvantaged. I do recognize the fact that I am steeped in privilege, and I want to make sure that I'm using my voice to facilitate and advocate for conversations like this. So I'm incredibly happy to be a part of this discussion and to moderate this conversation. Joining us will be members of the disability community speaking on their unique journey behind and in front of the camera. And I'm going to go ahead and give everybody a quick introduction, and then we'll jump into the questions. So first up, Erica Miles. Erica has worked on a number of productions, both in 2D and 3D, across a wide range of styles. She was selected as animation director of the 2020 and 2021 ACE program through WIA, and the short film Pivot that they created through the panel is premiering at the Spark Animation Festival this year. Next, we have Amy Amantea. Amy Amante. Amy is an artist, an actor, and disability advocate with 15 plus years of lived experience with blindness. Amy has spent her career in accessibility, largely focusing on arts and culture. And next we have David Roche. David is an inspirational humorist, keynote speaker, author, and performer who has transformed the challenges and gifts of living with facial difference into a compelling message. And last, Bonnie Sherr Klein. Bonnie has an incredible history as a documentary filmmaker at the National Film Board. She also co-founded Kickstart Society for Disability, Arts, and Culture. And more recently, she wrote the children's picture book, Beep Beep Bubby. So welcome to everybody on the panel. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
I am excited to get started with some of the questions. Erica, I'm going to start with you. What would you say is the biggest change for the better that you've seen through your experience?
Yeah, so I am a little bit more new to the disability space than the rest of our wonderful panel members. So yeah, I don't have as big of a, I guess, window of time for change that I've seen. But I would say one of the biggest things is having, discussions like this panel, where you actually have the people with disabilities actually speaking about their own experiences, because I find that a lot of the times we are spoken for and aren't allowed to, articulate our own experiences or, advocate for ourselves. So having, things like this, and then also in sort of, the animation and just film space, also having people with disabilities sort of in the roles where they can tell their own stories instead of having other people tell our stories for us. I think we're starting to see a bit more of that, which I think is really fantastic. And yeah.
I love hearing that. Visibility, but authentic representation as well. And I do want to invite everybody on this panel, Erica, David, Amy, and Bonnie, if at any point in time you want to jump in and add on to any of the answers that you hear, please feel free to jump in. But I'll jump ahead into the next question. Amy, in what ways do you think that the industry or companies have evolved to be more inclusive, and in what ways do you think they could do better?
Well, this question will also be a piggyback of what Erica just said, because nothing about us without us is the disability mantra. And in fact, many equity seeking folks are using that language as well. And this is the idea of inviting folks to the table for the discussion. I don't want to be doing something that other people think is in my best interest. I want to be a part of that discussion. I want to lead those discussions. And I think what I'm noticing now a lot in the arts and culture is that there's a lot of opportunity for consultation from folks with lived experience, that we're being invited to the table early enough in the game to address some systemic issues and make some systemic changes, which is like hugely radical if you think about it, compared to even where I was 10 years ago in this space. So that's something that really makes me proud. The fact that these discussions are opening up, again, I see this a lot in the equity seeking communities. I attend a lot of panels about, decolonization and LGBTQ and Black Lives Matter, because it's important for me to be an ally too. And I want to invite folks to be an ally if they don't identify with disability, because I think there aren't enough of us with disabilities to make the change. And a lot of us don't have, like you were talking about earlier, the privilege in spaces to be able to be the decision makers to facilitate that change. So it's, it's great to be invited at the table. And what I'd like to see next is allies sort of stepping aside and saying, okay, I'm going to put you in a leadership role. I'm starting to see a little bit of that in my own work, but I think we could do better at making space for individuals with lived experience, and not in a tokenizing way, but for people with lived experience to be able to lead some of this work instead of being just a part of the conversation. So we're moving in the right direction, I think. And again, I always say about accessibility, like, there's no finish line. This work is never done. We just, for me, I want to keep moving in a forward momentum. I don't want to do that 2 steps forward, 5 steps back thing, because walking backwards is a waste of my time. So I continue to look at this as, how do we move forward in a progressive way together, people with disabilities and allies together.
I promise you, if you look at my notes, I had that quote of there is no finish line. And
I say it often.
Yeah, I mean, because it's true, there is no finish line. And when you're an ally, speaking for allies, like, you can feel like, oh, I've read the book, or I've seen the video, or I think I got it, but you never do. And that work never ends. It should always be additive. You should always be working on not just learning, but like figuring out ways for you to actually help. You touched on a point about like, there is no finish line, and there's a lot of energy that goes into constantly advocating for yourself. So I encourage everyone who's in the audience who is an ally to think about, how can I use my privilege to help take some work off of the plate of people who are within, like, the disability community or any other disenfranchised group, and give them some of their energy back so they can focus on things that are maybe more strategic, or maybe focus on being able to move into leadership and to have those opportunities. If your energy is drained by just doing the very, like, to get your bare minimum rights, that's where allies can come in and provide some relief.
And I would offer too, just as a tandem to my own thoughts, but I would offer too that what I've noticed that I think is a great place, and we could still do better, is that, for many years of my career in advocacy around access for folks with disabilities, people were picking my brain all the time about stuff and never offering me compensation. And so I was working full time, but I could barely put food on my table. Because I was always somebody's teaching moment, and I love being the teaching moment, but now I'm in a place where I get paid to be the teaching moment, which is fantastic, which means that I can allocate my time to where I want to donate my time, because I have an income coming in. So I have the capacity to be able to donate to a higher extent than I did before, because now I'm not troubled about where that next paycheck is going to come from in the same way that I used to be. So that's also a great, when you're thinking about wanting to have an accessibility committee or have consultation, make sure that you can pay those folks the appropriate consultation wage, right? Build that into your budgets.
Wow.
Yeah, pay me, pay everyone. Having that money set aside, it's really important because it's time and energy is valuable. And in this space, like I said, you're advocating for yourself, you're advocating for your community. It's important to compensate appropriately. I want to shift over to David. Welcome. Hello. And ask you the question, what are some of the things that have always been important to you throughout your career so far? And when you're looking for at opportunities?
Wow, thank you very much. I'm reminded of when I was fairly early on, about a quarter of a century ago, I got a call back from to do a commercial for Mike's Hard Lemonade. And the thing was, I was supposed to be a scary being that popped out of somebody's neck. And when I got the call back, I was so excited for a day. And then I realized, oh my God, there's no way in the world I'm going to take a gig like that. And I chose at that point to throw my lot into disability arts because it was there that I could find authenticity. And not to say that every person with a disability or a facial difference is authentic, God knows, but more often that's the case. And I didn't think of myself even as having a disability until one of the doyen of the disability arts in San Francisco Bay Area, Cheryl Marie Wade, called me up after I had started doing solo work as a funny guy. And she said, do you know that you have a disability? And I said, huh? And she explained a lot to me, and that brought me into the fold. And so I've been working with people like Amy and Bonnie, and I'm happy. And authenticity. It's really good. And that ties in with what people with Erica and Amy have already been saying. Thank you.
Yeah, the idea of awareness is not just for people outside of the community, it's also internal as well, and learning about yourself and your place within the world must a part of that is that education process that happens. And that leads into the question I wanted to ask you, Bonnie. Has your disability been an advantage?
Okay. I know, I see that my lighting isn't good, so I apologize.
You look great, you look great.
But I'm a filmmaker, I should be better lit. This is very interesting to me, the whole thing. Has my disability been advantage? I'll start there. Well, first of all, I like your theme of widening the lens, and my best work has been done in feminism and in disability, because they're both communities that I am a part of, that I am speaking for myself and not speaking for others. And I have had the distinct privilege of being secure financially and being paid in a hands-off situation. This is the National Film Board of Canada. So that's quite amazing. And it's allowed me to be kind of smug about the industry, because I haven't had to go that route. And I've always been, I have to say, inappropriately snotty about women who I called careerists, who wanted to, make it in the industry. We used to say one of our maxims was we didn't just want a piece of the pie, we wanted to change the recipe, which is very nice if you have a secure job, as I said, like in the film board. But I really, listening to you and seeing a little bit of what women are doing, in the gaming industry, and I really changed my opinion, and I think it's great. So I applaud you, and everybody should do what gives them pleasure and satisfaction, and where they can make a difference, and as you feel you are doing. So that's one thing. But the specific of the question of the disability advantage, I have to say that I've come to believe that disability is an art. And the fact that we being people living with disability, have had to do all kinds of go-arounds, or whatever they're called, make-arounds, when you can't do certain things. You have to be resourceful, you have to be inventive, you have to be creative, and you are always inventing. So, I think that that's the advantage of the disadvantage that's seen as disability. And we become really good at it. And I suppose on another level, besides the resourcefulness, is that maybe it can make us more compassionate and more patient, and some other qualities that serve us all well. So I think that's all I have to say for now.
I frantically wrote down your quote. You didn't want a piece of the pie. You wanted to change the recipe. I love that energy. And I feel like there's something about this generation, the generation that's coming up behind me as well, that is wanting to knows the recipe, has seen the recipe in the works, but like wants to change the recipe. And I love that idea. That visual is amazing. And something that you talked about actually is making me recall like the conversation we'd met earlier and had a conversation just to get to know each other. But David, you and I wrote this down because this is something that inspired me. You had you talked a little bit about how when you're disabled, it's I say I don't mean to speak for the disabled community, but this is paraphrasing you. You said, we know something that you don't, and you need to know. And being a part of the disabled community, you had to learn and evolve. You couldn't just rely on things. You had to be really creative. And it echoes a little bit about what Bonnie was just talking about. And I would love to open the floor to let you talk about it more eloquently than I am.
I'll try. Thank you. It took me years to learn this. Well, I was a pioneer. I was out there all alone on stage, and so in that kind of, when you're a pioneer, you don't know what you're doing. You have to figure it out as you go along. One of the things that I learned, and it took me years, is that everybody feels disfigured, different in some way. Something is wrong with them. Now, the obvious ways are, like look at the cosmetics industry, fashion, et cetera, that constantly tries to prey upon the fear that people have about how they appear. Well, those of us who have a facial difference, we had to learn that early on. And we have great tools for doing it, just like Bonnie talks about. We have the knowledge of, I believe that everybody has a little place inside themselves where they feel guilt and shame and fear and ugliness. And if you don't take care of that, that's where the predators come to feed. Political, sexual, financial, military, et cetera. Those of us who have disabilities, in particular facial differences, know how to deal with that little place inside ourselves. And I didn't know that for a long time. People would tell me, oh, you changed my life. And I thought, well, they're just being nice to the little disfigured guy. But that wasn't the case. I really was changing people's lives. And the reason people like what I do. It's that I come out there and I look the way I do, and to some people it's shocking, and yet I radiate confidence out there and humor and stuff like that. Is that too complicated an answer?
It is a perfect answer. I think it would resonate a lot with people in the audience. It's resonating with me, like this idea that you maybe external influences, society, what have you, all of these factors that are kind of not letting you see your internal light, that spark that's within you. That's the thing that you're meant to share with the world. And so like, that's a really interesting concept of being able to recognize that within yourself and knowing like, this is something that's of value to the world. Let me share this with the world. So thank you for that answer.
Well,
It's really great.
that's changing the recipe then too, when you start looking at it that way. It's like, oh, Beethoven wrote the Ninth Symphony. That's so wonderful. Do you even know he was deaf? Well, he wrote it because he was deaf. That was the source of his strength. So that, so anyway, on and on.
It is I know you had mentioned like that you didn't know how you were inspiring to people, but you're right, that is that spark of inspiration that's there. And I would love to turn this back to Erica and bring you into the conversation as well, and ask you the question, in what ways do you think other people can show up as allies and advocates in a way that would be really meaningful?
Yeah, well, I think, yeah, definitely sort of drawing on what Amy mentioned before, and yeah, sort of raising disabled people up into those leadership roles. I was very, fortunate to be chosen for the ACE program through Women in Animation. And as a part of the application process for, like, to be accepted for the program, we had to pitch ourselves to a panel of jury of like really impressive, wonderful people from across the industry in Vancouver. And as part of, my pitch, I sort of, mentioned the fact that I have a disability and I'm autistic, and it sort of is part of the reason why I'm good at my job. There's a lot of, aspects to the way that my brain works that makes it really, I'm really good at sort of noticing all of the details. And because it's taken me sort of so long to figure out the way that my brain works and sort of learn about how different people process information differently, it has made me a lot more empathetic, and I feel like it makes me better with working with other people too, and not sort of forcing them into a specific box. But in addition to raising people into those leadership roles, I think it's really important for allies to sort of have supports in place and accommodations, and make sure that there's an environment where it's safe to ask for accommodations. And there isn't any sort of stigma attached to that as well, because you can often find that, sadly, in the industry. But I think that having those sort of supports in place are incredibly important, and letting people sort of speak to their own experiences and putting them in those places, because I feel like that helps not only people with disabilities but everyone as well. So, and also making sure that it's very intersectional as well. So not just, disabilities, but people of color, people in the LGBTQ community, because it all sort of intermingles, and people that, have identities that cross within those identities too. They have a very specific viewpoint and experience that often doesn't get seen. So those people especially, I think, are important to sort of raise up into those positions.
Yeah, thank you for calling out the intersectionality piece of it. And Amy, would you like to add to that?
I'd love to add to that,
Yes.
Erica. Very well put. And I guess what I'd love to add is that allyship can swing too far to the extreme. So I think I love allies. I can't do what I do without allies. But there is a convention called Performative Allyship, which is actually disempowering for somebody with a disability. You take my voice away. And so some of the examples that have happened to me in my life have been like, somebody's parked in the accessible spot and we can't park there. And then the driver of the car gets out and says, "What? You're parked in an accessible spot? Don't you know this is a spot for disabilities?" And it's like, it doesn't come from my voice. That wasn't my voice. Or when I go to a restaurant and somebody hands me a menu and the person I'm with says, "She's blind, she can't read the menu." Okay, I have a voice and I can speak for myself. And so we have to be careful as allies to not overstep and overpower the voice of the person with the disability, because then we do the opposite of allyship. We take that ownership away. So allies have a very, very purposeful role to support the community, to uplift the community, but to not speak for or about the community, even though they have the best of intentions. And that's where it gets to be kind of like, and I would guess that maybe there are other equity seeking groups that could relate to that kind of performative allyship, but it's certainly a very strong thing in the disability, because again, systemically, we have often had people speak for us our entire lives, whether it's our parents in a doctor's office or whether it's medical professionals or teachers on our behalf, right? So that's a systemic root that goes really, really deep. And some of those wounds cut really hard.
Well said. Absolutely. It is something that I think other groups can also relate to, is wanting allies to be there for the support, but not wanting the allies to step over those boundaries. And as an ally, sometimes you're thinking like, I don't want to make a mistake, so I'm not going to do anything. And that's not what this panel is saying at all. Like, the allies are incredibly important. That energy is needed, that support, that amplification is needed from allies. It's recognizing that as an ally, you are going to make mistakes. You are going to make dozens and dozens of mistakes. It's going to require you to be humble, and when you make a mistake, to seek forgiveness and then to learn from that experience and then to grow from there. Anyone else want to add to that question before I move on? My next question actually is to you, Amy. What are some of the ways in which folks can take steps towards allyship? And can you go too, I guess we already talked about this a little bit. Can you go too far with it? And if we've already answered that, we can also, you can also answer the question of, do you have an allyship story that comes into mind where you were really proud of how someone else was able to show up for you or for others?
I have a great allyship story. So I'm an artist, a blind, almost totally blind artist. I was taking an arts workshop. It was an intensive, a 2-week intensive, where I showed up in a room. I was the only one that identified with disability. And then of course, blindness being a disability that has very specific access needs, right? So sometimes I need a sighted guide. Sometimes I need to make sure that there isn't like people's backpacks cluttered in the space that I'm going to trip on, things like that. This was a movement class, and I'm not a dancer, okay? But this is a movement class filled with 20 folks that identified as dancers, and then me. And I love to move, I love to dance, but I'm not a trained dancer. And our exercise was called non-stopping. And this idea of non-stopping was that everybody was in a room together, and the room was a dance studio, so not overly large. And you move your body without thinking. That's the idea. The idea is to let go of your practice as a dancer or as a mover, and to move your body without thinking. So I think, you could maybe imagine some of the erratic, chaotic movements that you just sort of let your body do without pre-planning it. And we had to do this for like 30 minutes straight, right? Without taking a break. So people are running around and moving around and jumping and launching off walls. And here I am thinking, oh my gosh, my teeth are going to be knocked out of my face. And that is actually my motto. If I can get to the end of the day with my teeth in my face, it's been a fantastic day. But my teeth, I like to keep my teeth in my face. So I took a chair and I set it in the floor, and I thought, okay, as long as I have my hand on this chair, this is like my anchor, and I can move around this chair. So somebody in this room, after our first 30 minutes of doing this exercise, came over to me and said, I noticed that you were anchored to this chair this whole time. And I said, yeah, well, I didn't want to bump into folks, and I don't want folks to bump into me, and I can't keep track of where people are in this space. And it's kind of a little overwhelming for me. And so, he called over a friend of his, and he said, we have an idea. What do you think about you being able to move any way you want, anywhere in this space, and we'll shadow you. We'll just sort of make a force field around you so that nobody comes into your bubble. And in that moment, I tell you, for 30 minutes, I moved like I have never moved in my life. I found every nook, every floor, every corner of that space. I used it, I moved in it, I tumbled, I ran, I jumped, and never a person came into my space. And it was the first time in my life, even if I could not, because I was a sighted person for a long time and I had never been put in a position where I could move like that. But here I am in this group of 20 people and everybody was like, this is Amy's space. And there were just these two people, like social distance, but it wasn't the time for social distancing. And they were just moving around me and they would just tap somebody on the shoulder who was in their own world doing their thing. And that person would be like, oh, look, okay, I'll move over here. And it was one of the most beautiful things in support of allyship that I've ever experienced, because I got to experience the exercise equitably, just like everybody else, instead of being the one person who's siloed doing my own thing in the corner. And the freedom that comes with that it's one of the most joyous moments that I've ever had as an artist, as an artist living with blindness, right? So that was it was a great example of allyship for me.
Love that. That's such a great example of equity, of recognizing that it wasn't just about like giving you your own room, because that's not the experience that would have been as freeing as the experience you got.
And I didn't have to ask for it.
And that you didn't have to ask for it.
Somebody came up to me and they employed the ask, listen, act, right? Ask, can I assist you? Listen to what I say. And then, yeah, that sounds great. Let's give it a try, right? Like those are always rules of thumb when you want to ask somebody with a disability if you can help them. You don't make assumptions, you just ask, right? So it really was a beautiful moment for me.
I love that. Ask, listen,
ask, listen, act.
And just to clarify, so for the audience, and just so we can all learn from this, so like when you're asking, you're checking in to say like, hey, I noticed X. Is there something I can help with?
Yep. You don't even have to say I noticed. You can just say, my name is so-and-so. Can I assist you with anything? And I might say, no, I'm good. Great. You respect that. You go on your way. Or I might say, oh my gosh, I'd love a sighted guy to cross the street, or whatever it is. And then you just follow that person's lead, right? So often as people with disabilities, our personal boundaries are violated based on assumptions. So like, I have a wheelchair using friend who often is manually wheeling up a hill and somebody will come and push her wheelchair. And she's like, I don't want you to touch my wheelchair. That's my own personal space. Right. So that person didn't ask. They just assumed that she looked like she was struggling. And if they had asked, maybe she would have said help, said please, or maybe she would have said, no, you know what, I got this. Like, takes me a little longer, but I got it. Feels good to do it myself, you know?
Yeah. Sometimes we jump in, we think with the best of intentions.
That's right.
And it's really just better to just ask first.
Yeah. I always think intentions are they're very important. And I recognize like not everybody knows the language or what to do. And intentions for me are really, really important, because I can sense whether you're coming from a place of good intentions or not. But then I think that there are forums like this where we get to actually, you know, provide a little education, a little context to the experience, so that you know, folks that don't identify with disability don't have to feel so terrified about interacting with us. You know, they got some tools.
I feel like everybody on this panel probably has developed sort of that extra sense of, is someone coming with good intentions or not? Just kind of the vibes that you're getting just in general. So yeah, it's great to just clarify, just to be super clear and just to ask and move on if it's not needed, and help when it's needed. So David, I have a question I've been pretty excited to ask you about, the fact that you're working on a really exciting project, and that's about being strong on the inside first. And I would love to know and share with the audience, in what ways do you think that this message is important for everyone?
Oh, thank you for asking. I think that it's important because, okay, it's the necessity as I see it, and I'm in there trying to stir up the pot. And the message is, those of us with facial differences and with disabilities, we're not victims, we're not survivors, we are teachers, we are leaders, we have something to show you. As I mentioned earlier, that idea that, yeah, we have had to learn how to build our sense of inner strength and vitality and light, however you want to put it, because we couldn't depend on the artificial, quote, artificial resources that the general public can do. We have a film, a performance film that my wife and I made called Love at Second Sight. We're going to be pushing that. There's a music video that goes with it that has some animation in, yay. We helped the Children's Craniofacial Association in Dallas do their retreats and do their conferences. We help them build a speakers bureau for people with facial differences who want to speak, particularly in schools, kind of picking up on the book in the film Wonder when it first came out. There are two amazing speakers in that speakers bureau have emerged, young women of color with facial differences who are just so brilliant that we're going to be pushing, publicizing, marketing them worldwide. As I now, without trying, I've become part of a global community of people with facial difference. Okay, this is Facebook, right? And so we're gonna leverage that, we're gonna muscle that, and we're gonna just remember the names, LaSalle Dotson and Jasmine Gray. They are new leaders, not of tomorrow, of today. You can tell I'm all excited about it.
Amazing. Yes, no, absolutely. And I love that you're sharing them and you're using your experience and your position and the power that you have to like help look behind you and pull up the future, not the future, the present leaders, as you called it, which is great.
It's so obvious, actually. Yeah.
And we've been talking a lot about like inner strength and that light that you have within you and understanding yourself. So Bonnie, I would love to ask you the question, with your experience, what advice do you have for others about being authentic to who you are?
Ah.
I know it's a big question, and I definitely open it up to everyone on the panel.
Good.
I can answer that question for Bonnie.
Oh.
Because
Yes, please, David, but I would definitely love to hear from Bonnie too, but
Okay,
go ahead, David.
Okay. I was in a film that she directed called Shameless, The Art of Disability, a National Film Board film. And that she was authentically herself because she supported all of us so well that we said, Donnie, stop, you have to be in the film. And she finally agreed to be in it. But that wonderful resonant quality of being in a community and seeing what the community needed and speaking to it. Don't you think that's true, Bonnie? That we called her the mother duck.
Thank you for speaking for me, David. Sometimes we need allies, even us. Yes. Yeah, it's hard to put yourself out there sometimes, yeah. So I didn't want to be in the film, and I had to be convinced by the editor of the film that I was in fact the glue that held all these other artists together. But we don't all want to be in front of the camera. Especially if we're used to being behind it.
It has to be tough to be vulnerable in that scenario and
Exactly.
to put yourself out there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Amy and Erica, do you have any thoughts on how to be authentic, how to bring that authenticity, whether it's in your personal life or at work? It's a tough question.
Go ahead, Erica.
Me? Okay. It's not easy for sure. Yeah, for me, especially because my disability is often so stigmatized.
Right.
And yeah, there's a lot of very negative connotations associated with it, that I was kind of afraid to be authentic about it at first, because I was afraid that it would change people's perceptions of, yeah, my capabilities, especially at work and things like that. But I was, yeah, so fortunate that I was surrounded by, yeah, supportive community. So I was able to be my authentic self and was accepted. And yeah, I feel like I was very fortunate to have that positive experience, because it's not always the case for people, especially on the autism side. But yeah, I would say, yeah, if you are in that sort of space where you have that supportive community, being your authentic self is definitely worth it. And yeah.
Love
But
that.
yeah, not easy.
It isn't easy, and it does definitely require being vulnerable, but I love your answer about like building and cultivating that circle of support. And Amy, I would love to extend that question to you about authenticity, but also cultivating a circle of support in your industry and in your life. How important you think that is?
Well, certainly having a network is hugely important. And one of the things that for myself, I acquired my sight loss when I was 24. So for all intents and purposes, I lived an able-bodied life. I am the ultimate example of the TAB, the temporarily able-bodied person, right? Anybody can join this club at any time. That's the reality of the human experience, right? Which is why access is really so important, because we don't know if we're going to need it tomorrow. You know, you could go camping and something could go wrong, and the next day you're part of the club. So being your authentic self for me is super important. Building a network is important. And what I would say is, and I love this about my fellow PWDers in the room, you are exactly who you are in this moment, and that is okay. You're allowed to be that person in this moment. And I think authenticity around disability is not just about disclosure, because it doesn't have to be about disclosure. It just needs to be about you knowing that you are exactly right for this moment. And if that means you're sad in that moment, great. If that means you're frustrated in that moment, that's okay too. But this idea that there's often an idea, and I feel this personally too, where it's like, for me, if I'm the the disgruntled blind girl, it looks bad for all of blind people, right? It's like blind people, if somebody interacts with me and I'm having a bad day and I'm rude to you, then the next person with a disability, they will never ask if they need support, because their experience with me has been so negative. So I feel the weight of that. And oftentimes folks with disabilities feel the weight of carrying that community and that stigmatization that can happen. So, but knowing that like, again, that you are who you are is exactly okay in that moment. And I love that mantra, because every day is different for me and I get to just exist in that moment. And then what happens when you get to be your authentic self mostly is when you figure out how to do that for you, because that's unique to each of us, your networks actually come pretty organically. That's been my experience, is that, and my most recent example of that is I took a leap of faith, literally, and put together a 20-minute piece for our local Vines Festival here in Vancouver, which is an outdoor festival that happens in parks around August in the Vancouver area. I'd never done it before. And I put this piece together around my relationship with photography, a blind photographer, right? But like, I take photos because I find the light, and I take photos of pockets of light, and what's there is there. But I've never seen the photos the same way that other people see them. So I've always had to have them described to me. So I built a piece around different folks describing my own photos to me. And lo and behold, a theater company was like, hey, this is really interesting. And now I've got 2 theater companies that want to develop this piece and travel it around the country, because I took a chance at being an artist and being who I was. And so I started to see that when I put myself out there, the networks actually come fairly organically, but you have to be willing to put yourself out there. And that's the hardest piece, because we all have insecurities, and those of us with disabilities may have additional insecurities and additional barriers to that process. But I literally just threw caution at the wind and said, you know what have I got to lose? at the end of the day, I've got nothing really to lose. And it turns out I had a whole bunch to gain. So that we're in that process now, and that's super exciting. And as I'm in that process, I'm building allies and creating more networks. And it's this snowball effect that's going to happen. And that's really exciting. And those networks will exist for a long time. So just like throw caution to the wind and give it a try, right? Whatever your field is, give it a try, because you just don't know who's watching.
Yeah, I love that. Relinquishing fear and just going for it, and the networks that you're building, the allyships and things like the connections that are coming from it is one thing, but I do want to like call out the fact that this is also amazingly inspiring for people who see it and said, this is, if they know the origin of how that came to be, that they could look at their lives and say, what is fear preventing me from actually doing and accomplishing and trying, just trying. It's life is experimentation, right? We are at time, but I do actually want to open the floor to the panelists. I know we didn't have enough time to go through all of the wonderful questions that we had. Panelists, please jump in if there's anything you want to leave our audience with, anything else you want to share with everyone before we sign off.
Oh, it's been very inspiring, I think, although we hate that word. We're not around to inspire other people. But I have been inspired.
Well, I'm glad to hear it. Thank you, everyone who was a part of this panel. Appreciate your time. Have a wonderful remainder of your day, and everyone in the audience, thank you so much.
Thank you, Alka.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks very much.